Thank you very much, Sean, to, first of all, my new shadow minister of Labour, who is working hard on behalf of all of us, and thanks to Sean Strickland for hosting me. But most of all, thanks to all of you who either build the country or fight for the people who build the country. You're the ones who handle the grievances, negotiate the wages, find the jobs, provide the skills, and train the future. But before I get into my common sense plan, tax the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime, I just want to share some staggering arithmetic. So I checked today the Government of Canada Job Bank for the average median wage for the carpenter, not code. They say it's $30 an hour. But let's say they have a great union local and they've been able to negotiate $40 an hour. $40 an hour, 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, works out to $80,000. According to any calculation at online mortgage calculator, to buy the average home in Canada today, you need $142,000. So that arithmetic is very simple. The carpenter who builds the home cannot afford to buy the home. And I saw this not as a statistic, but as a real-life story when I was in a Northern Ontario Tim Hortons last summer and literally met a young carpenter who said he lives in his car because his rent rose faster than his income and he couldn't afford to pay it, and so he's living in a parking lot. That right there summarizes everything that has happened in our economy after 9 years of Justin Trudeau, who is not worth the cost. And I understand Mr. Trudeau was here yesterday and blaming the world for how badly he's performed as Prime Minister. It sounds like it was more of a therapy session than it was a policy presentation. He was talking about how the world has made it impossible for him to keep his promise to the middle class. Remember the famous promise that he was going to help the middle class and those working hard to join it? Remember, he made that promise when the average rent in Canada was $950, when the average home cost just over $400,000. Well, 9 years later, housing costs have doubled. Half of Canadians are buying food that is past its best before date. A fifth of Canadians say their health has diminished because they're eating rotten or low-quality food. We did not have these problems before Justin Trudeau. We did not have 2 million people lined up at food banks. We did not have 8,000 joining the Facebook group called the Dumpster Diving Network. This is a group of Canadians who share tips on how to find a meal in a garbage can. We didn't have 28 dead bodies in coolers outside of the St. John's Hospital next to a dumpster because their family members cannot afford a burial or a cremation, and so they've asked the hospital to just refrigerate the bodies until they can save up enough money to say goodbye to their father, mother, aunt, or uncle. That did not happen before Justin Trudeau. But so you can imagine, on the stage yesterday, his role was not to brag about all that he's achieved in a decade, but to make excuses. But I'm here to tell you, first and foremost, that these mistakes and these excuses don't cut it, because the rest of the world is not living through the misery that he has caused here at home. For example, the rest of the world is not paying Justin Trudeau's carbon tax or anywhere close to it. We now have the second highest carbon tax in the developed world. We have the second highest annual death rate associated with opioid overdose among the 11 countries that the Commonwealth Fund has studied. Only the U.S. is worse. We have worse housing affordability than all but one of the nearly 40 OECD countries. Incomes in Canada, housing costs in Canada have risen 40% faster than incomes. That is the biggest gap of any G7 country and the second worst in the entire OECD. After 9 years of Trudeau, we have the fewest homes per capita of any country in the G7, even though we have the most land to build on, we spend the most money on residential construction, and we have by far the most mortgage debt as a share of our GDP. This decade, the OECD says that Canada has had the worst economic growth in that group of nations, and they project we will have the worst economic growth for the next 3 decades. Canada is one of only 8 countries in the OECD where average real incomes today are lower than before the pandemic, as inflation has outpaced nominal income growth. I repeat, we cannot use the dog ate our homework excuse of COVID for that, because most of the advanced countries have seen incomes outpaced inflation since the pandemic, even though here in Canada we have not. And Canada is expected to rank dead last among OECD countries for growth in labor productivity over most of the next 40 years. That is his record put up against other countries. So no, it is not acceptable to simply blame the rest of the world for problems that are made in Canada. And furthermore, it's worth recognizing that while most Canadians are suffering, it is the working class that is suffering the most. The working class has been turned into the working poor. The policies of Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Singh are disproportionately bad for wage earners. Let me tell you why. When the government runs deficits, and it can't fund those deficits through borrowing alone, they create more cash. So in the last 3 years, the money supply in Canada has grown from $1.8 trillion to about $2.4 trillion. Now, that is a 32% increase in the number of coins, bills, and bank deposits. The economy, meanwhile, grew by about 4%. So the cash is growing 8 times faster than the stuff that cash buys. And when that happens, the cash bids up the price. If you have an economy with 10 apples and $10, it's $1 an apple. You double the number of dollars in the economy to 20 and you still have only 10 apples, well, you're not twice as rich, it's just that each apple costs twice as much. So now it's $2 an apple. That is inflation, or as I call it, just inflation. But the reality is, inflation doesn't affect everybody equally. There's always been the tension, and the union movement has been at the forefront of fighting for justice in that tension between capital and labor. Capital and labor. Who benefits and who loses from inflation? Well, people with a lot of capital do okay. Why? Because their capital goes up with inflation. If you have speculative land holdings, jewelry, fancy wines, arts, stocks, and the government causes inflation, well, your assets are bid up and you get richer. And that's one of the reasons why wealth is concentrating in Canada today, because those who have inflation-proof or inflation-positive assets are getting richer every single day. But those people who live off their wages, well, their purchasing power goes down. They suffer a real pay cut. And that is what has happened to our working class. You represent the wage earners and the future pensioners. Their wages and pensions have lost purchasing power. Meanwhile, big government and big business and big capital has gotten rich by the inflationary policies of government. It is a transfer of wealth from the have-nots to the have-yachts. And so, meanwhile, government bureaucracy blocks home building, which bids out housing costs. Again, if you own a mansion on a hill somewhere, your net worth has gone up. But if you're a working-class kid doing an apprenticeship in one of the union training halls who dreams one day of owning a home, well, the ladder has just been lifted up the castle wall, and you'll never be able to climb that ladder because it's out of reach. So it is the working poor, the working class, and what was called 9 years ago the middle class, who have suffered the most under NDP and Liberal policies. The good news is, life was not like this before this NDP Liberal government, and it won't be like this after they're gone. We're going to bring home the Canada we know and love with a common-sense plan that will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Let me start with axing the tax. Of course, your members are disproportionately harmed by the carbon tax and related policies because they have to drive trucks. It's not possible to, especially in rural and remote communities, and I know you represent many of those communities. Those folks who drive trucks in order to take their tools to job sites pay a disproportionately high price for the carbon tax. They are among the 60% of Canadian families who pay more in taxes than they get back in rebates. And then their employers have to pay that tax, which forces them to reduce wages and pass on the losses to their wage-earning workers. By a common-sense Conservative government will axe the tax to lower the cost of gas, heat, and groceries and ensure that the purchasing power of the working people is enhanced. Further to that point, we will fix the budget. The inflationary spending I described is the result, all the inflation I just described is actually only the symptom. The disease is overspending. Government spending drives deficits, taxes, and inflationary money printing. We're going to use a common sense principle that your members and your union halls use every single day to run your finances. It's called the dollar for dollar rule. My government will legislate a rule that every time we bring in $1 new of spending, we must find $1 of savings to pay for it. That will require we go into our bureaucratic departments and root out waste and mismanagement to optimize use of money. If we want to spend more here, we have to spend less there, or we have to get a bargain here and there. That's how seniors, single moms, and small businesses run their finances. It's how I will run my government. We will obviously get rid of waste like the $35 billion infrastructure bank that doesn't complete infrastructure projects, the $60 million ArriveCan app, the $1 billion so-called Green Fund, 15% of which has already been known to be misappropriated. We'll cut back on foreign aid to dictators, terrorists, and multinational bureaucracies and bring that money home to put it into funding our military. We will optimize the use of our dollars so that we can balance the budget and the money printing and bring down inflation and interest rates. In addition to fixing the budget, we're going to build the homes. You're the ones who will actually build the homes, actually, the truth be told. But we're the ones that need to get out of the way to let you do it. Canada, as I said at the outset, has the fewest homes per capita of any country in the G7, even though we have the most land to build on. We spend 9% of our GDP on residential construction, which is twice the OECD average, twice what they spend in the States. We have the most mortgage debt as a share of GDP. And we have by far the most land and lumber per capita. So how is it that we have the fewest homes? The answer is that we have the absolute worst bureaucracy. We have the second slowest building permits in the OECD. This might seem like a nuisance. It's not a nuisance. It is a massive cost. C.D. Howe calculates that in Vancouver, the cost of permits, that is to include the charges, the fees, the delays, the rezoning, the consultants, the lawyers, adds up to $1.3 million for every newly built home. In Toronto, it's $350,000. The GTA municipalities have hiked their development charges 900%. Winnipeg blocked 2,000 homes next to a transit station built for those homes. Montreal has blocked 25,000 homes in the last 7 years, according to the Montreal Economic Institute. All of that is passed on to only two people, the person who builds the home and the person who buys the home. Let's be honest, the big developers don't pay any of it. They pass it all on. And if the cost gets too high to make it profitable, they go build somewhere else. But your members and young working-class homebuyers can't simply move to Florida or Singapore. They have to find a home in Barrie. And so they're the ones that are paying the full price. I am no longer going to give federal dollars to local bureaucracies to block home building. Rather, I'm going to reform the entire infrastructure transfer to municipalities to link the dollars they get to the homes that are allowed to be built. They will be required to free up land, speed up permit, and reduce development charges as a condition of getting federal funds. We'll require they permit 15% more housing completions per year to get the funds. If they beat the target, they'll get a bonus. If they miss the target, they'll pay a fine. We'll sell off 6,000 federal buildings and thousands of acres of federal land to build, build, build. I'll require every federally funded transit station be pre-permitted for high-density housing all around and even on top before the municipality will get the money. They will have to bridge finance, and I will not send them the check until there are apartments around those transit stations so our youth and seniors can live next to bus and trains, and we will back the trades because we need more boots, not more suits. My common sense plan will bring in a full write-off for the cost of food, transportation, and accommodation so that your members can move from one job site to another. Today, a CEO can write off the cost of his private jet, but a pipe fitter who travels from Timmins to Fort Mac to do a job can only write up $4 grand, even if he has to do 20 flights a year. That is insane. And yesterday, we had the minister come before you and ask you to thank him because he's going to consider looking at, studying the Conservative private members' bill to bring tax fairness for traveling trade workers. Enough consideration. That minister is allowing CEOs the write-off. It's time to allow the workers the same write-off, and common sense Conservatives will adopt the bill from Chris Lewis, Conservative from Windsor, C241, to let our tradespeople write off those costs. This builds on other pro-worker. Yes, thank you. This builds on other pro-worker policies that we have supported since my leadership. Conservative bill from Sarnia MP, Marilyn Gladue, which puts pensions to the front of the line in the event of bankruptcy so that the bondholders and other financial speculators do not get paid before pensioners when a large employer goes bankrupt. The liquidated assets of the company go first and foremost to fully funding the pension of the workers and keeping the promise to them. I'm proud that that bill passed the House of Commons and the Senate and is now law so that pensions are safe. Now, I know that in this room you already have a lot of your unions run great pension programs, and I congratulate you for investing wisely in your workers' future. We also voted again in favor of the anti-scab legislation in recognition that our working people have the right to bargain and fight for wage increases that they need in order to keep up with the galloping inflation that has ripped them off. We will also put an end to the abuse in the temporary foreign worker program. Yesterday, I don't have to actually criticize the government for this, because yesterday, I'm told before you that Mr. Trudeau said the temporary foreign workers program was out of control. Geez, if only he knew somebody who could do something about that. If only he could find out who's been in charge for the last 9 years, during which time the number of temporary foreign workers has tripled from 60,000 in 2015 to 188,000 last year. Tripled. While we still have trades workers who can't find jobs, he brings in temporary foreign workers in order to allow employers to bid down wages and undercut Canadians. This is outrageous. When I was employment minister, we cut back on temporary foreign workers because we saw in the data exactly what the big corporations were doing. They were abusing the program to drive down wages. In a free market, you have a natural tension between work and wages, where the employer has to bid up wages in order to attract the best workforce. But that free market doesn't exist if he can simply go outside of Canada and replace available Canadian workers with temporary foreign workers from lower wage countries who are willing to accept less money and much abuse. And that abuse has run rampant under Justin Trudeau, and it's gotten to the point where we're even using tax dollars to subsidize temporary foreign workers and other foreign workers coming to our country, taking jobs that Canadians could be doing. We see this with the Nexstar plant in Windsor, where the job descriptions for people say that they have to have a fluency in Korean. And this is not just for highly specialized work related to the setup of the plant. It is for jobs that can, like forklift operator, that Canadians can and do. And this is at a time when your members are in Windsor are out of work. My government policy will be very simple. There will be no tax dollars to subsidize foreign workers. Our tax dollars are for our workers in this country, period. I also want to address the larger foreign worker problem that is invisible, and it is the fact that we are importing goods and services from countries that we could be producing here at home. So let's stay on the theme of electric cars. Canada produces little to no lithium. In 2022, we produced no lithium, even though we have about the 6th biggest reserves on Earth. So when you see people driving around in Teslas, feeling good about all they've done for the environment, the lithium in that battery was refined in China, probably mined in South America, rather than coming out of mines here in Canada, even though we have the stuff right beneath our feet. Why? Because we have the 2nd slowest building permits in the OECD. It takes 19 years to go from concept to shovel in the ground for a mine. 19 years. This does nothing for the environment. What do we learn about the environment in years 16, 17, and 18 of the study that we could not have learned in year 1 and 2? That is the question. Well, what we're learning is that we're outsourcing our economic future and taking jobs away from tradespeople who could be mining these minerals. In Northern Ontario, we have what should be the Ring of Fire, still not operational. I talked to the First Nations who want the project to get going. I said, is the shovel in the ground? They say the snow shovel is in the ground. Why? Because they've been waiting 5 years for a permit for a highway to get to the future mines. 5 years for a highway permit. This is insane. We need to speed up our permitting. I will repeal the unconstitutional law, Bill C-69, and replace it with a law that will streamline approvals, protect the environment, consult First Nations, but get mines and other major resource projects approved in 18 months, not 18 years. We will build natural gas liquefaction plants, pipelines. We will use responsibly our oil sands. We will approve nuclear facilities to power our grid with clean, green, Canadian nuclear power using Saskatchewan uranium, Ontario know-how, and your trades workers from right across this country, because they are the best in the world. We're going to bring home our money to this country, turn dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people. And speaking of bringing home to our country, we want to bring home safety to our communities. Because after 9 years of Justin Trudeau, we have crime, chaos, drugs, and disorder in our streets. We have shooting deaths that are up over 100% in just a decade. And of course, your members are the victims of these crimes. That is the result of the catch and release criminal justice system that Trudeau has given us, so that the same 40 offenders had to be arrested 6,000 times in Vancouver. That's 150 arrests per offender per year. My common sense plan would make repeat offenders ineligible for bail, parole, or house arrest. It will be jail, not bail, jail, not bail. We will bring in treatment and recovery services rather than decriminalized and tax subsidized hard drugs so that we can bring our loved ones home drug-free. And finally, we will respect your right to lawfully use your firearms. The Prime Minister believes that we need to ban hunting rifles. He wants to ban your hunting rifle. He wants to ban all civilian firearms ownership. Bill C-21 plus 300 pages of hunting rifles that he tried to amend out of existence in that law, and with the support of the NDP, wants to take away the ability of Canadian trades workers to enjoy the outdoors and hunting on the weekends. My friends, I'm interested in protecting Canadians from criminals, not turkeys from hunters. So I will be repealing C-21. I will protect your right to hunt and sport shoot. And I will put the saved money into rebuilding border security and rebuilding the security at our ports to scan the shipping containers so that we can stop criminals from taking stolen cars out and bringing illegal drugs and guns in. That is how we will make our streets safe from illegal firearms. We're going to put you back in charge of your life. You know, yesterday the Labour Minister talked about the pretender versus the real man. Funny, as he supports a guy who was literally an actor as the Prime Minister, someone who pretended he would do great things for the middle class but has now deprived them of home ownership and food, and contrasts this against the so-called real man. Well, if we want to idealize the real man or the real woman, it is not any politician. It is the people you represent, the people who literally build this nation with their hands, the common people. And I want to be your champion. I don't want to run your life. I don't want to decide on your behalf. I don't believe I have any special virtue or wisdom to lord over the population. I want a smaller government with bigger citizens, with free speech so you can decide what you see and say, with economic freedom so your members and the entrepreneurs who employ them keep more of what they earn, where we speed up and lower the cost of getting things done so that you can swing the hammers, turn the wrenches, and use the natural genius and earn skills to build a better life for yourselves and your families. I want to put you back in charge of your life here in Canada, the freest country on earth, built by the common sense of the common people, united for our common home. Your home, my home, our home. Let's bring it home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Thanks very much for your support on temporary foreign workers. The all-party support for anti-scab legislation, I think, is unprecedented, and thank you and your caucus for your support on the passing of anti-scab